Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of the WMATA Board of February 11th, 2021. Welcome. Seeing that this is our first public meeting, I'll ask our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa Impastato, to begin with our safety contact. Ms. Impastato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This year marks the 57th annual recognition of the month of February as American Heart Month. This year, the federally designated event is even more important due to the impact of the coronavirus on the public's heart health, including potential harmful effects on the heart and vascular system, according to recent research. Also, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many people have delayed or avoided going to hospitals for heart attacks and strokes, netting poorer outcomes and prompting the American Heart Association to create a national awareness campaign that reminds people that hospitals are the safest place to go when you have cardiac symptoms. Additionally, while sheltering in their homes, many have experienced reduced activity levels, faced stress, suffered sleep issues, and struggled to maintain a healthy diet, all of which can contribute to heart disease risk. Heart disease continues to be the greatest health threat to Americans and is still the leading cause of death worldwide. In most cases, heart disease is preventable when people adopt a healthy lifestyle and get regular checkups. Find out more at heart.org. This concludes this morning's safety contact.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Appreciate that. Again, welcome to today's Metro Board Committee meetings. We're beginning with the Executive Committee meeting this morning, followed by the Finance and Capital Committee and the Safety and Operations Committee. But first, I'd like to ask the Board Corporate Secretary, Jennifer Ellison, to call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg.
Present.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins.
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman.
Present.
Director McMillan.
Present.
Director Letourneau.
Present.
Alternate Director Bulger.
Present.
Director Slater.
Present.
And Alternate Director Rouse.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. And as a reminder for staff presenting on today's call, please introduce yourself with name and title. Now we can begin today's meeting. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Do any of the committee members have any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now, the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of our December 10th, 2020 meeting and December 10th, 2020 executive session before us for approval. If there are any objections, or are there any objections to the minutes as presented by committee members? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Thank you again. We have two items before us today on the agenda. The first is to approve changes to Metro's procurement programs. These proposed changes will broaden and expand our reach to minority and women-owned businesses, enabling more businesses to participate in Metro contracts as either a prime or subprime contractor. The next item is a report on the Metro Transit Police Department community policing and engagement process, and includes information on the MTPD Investigations Review Panel, the various reform committees created in coordination with the Fraternal Order of Police, and the MTPD's Oversight and Youth Services Bureau. Now I'll turn the floor over to Ms. Suzette Moore for our first item. Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Suzette Moore, Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer for WMATA. I'll share my screen now. The purpose of my presentation this morning is to request approval from the board to replace the Small Business and Local Preference Program with the broader Women and Minority Business Enterprise Program, and also to provide the board with an update on our Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. By way of background, a little bit of history on our Small Business Local Preference Program. It was approved by the board October 2005. At the time, it was only applicable to those procurements that are simplified procurements at $100,000. We've decided that that is not fruitful for what we're trying to do and the goals we're trying to meet at WMATA. So I'll be explaining a little bit more how we're looking to broaden small business involvement in our contracting practices. The program as it was designed was a preference program for small businesses to participate in any project that we would put a preference on. The idea was that the small business would become a prime contractor on that procurement. That did not always happen, and the small businesses would not get the business. What we're doing to address the underperforming small business preference program is that we're looking to incorporate race-neutral components into our women business, minority business program, very similar to what is in place already for the Small Business Enterprise Program on the federal level in our DBE program. We're looking to build capacity in our current directory so that we will have those projects to set aside for the small businesses. The process would be, as projects are identified, we would look to our directory of small businesses and decide, yes, there's a pool of businesses that can do this work. This is a good one to set aside so that it will be awarded to a small business. We're trying to market our program. We're looking to our marketing department to help with getting the word out, using the resources there to be able to advertise that we have this new program on board. We are also looking at different associations, small business associations. We're looking at other agencies to see what they're doing and how they're marketing their programs. We want to make sure that the small and minority business community knows that we are standing up this program. We're having a disparity study done right now. It's already underway. They're in the data collection phase right now. My staff is totally engaged in this process. The term of the contract is 9 months, so we look to have the study done in that time frame. We've also hired 2 small business auditors. They will be responsible for implementing and maintaining this program as we move forward with it. And we're also now identifying criteria for the program. We're looking at things like certification. We want to be able to have reciprocal certification. The firms demonstrate that they're already certified in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. They will get granted into the program. We want to make that process as simple as possible. Goal setting methodology, we have tried and true process in place right now for the DBE program. We will continue to roll that out. Things like self-performance. We want the minority firms to self-perform the work to be able to meet the goals. So we're looking at things like that as we stand up this program. Oversight over the program, we'll continue with our procurement review committee. That is a committee with procurement, our small business program office, the program side of the house, come together a couple times a month right now to look at all procurements before they go out the door. Their primary goal is assessing the projects for goals, achievable goals. And also the committee would stand up again if there's any projects that need waiver requests. So it is an oversight committee for the DBE program, and it will be for the MBE program as well. We're also using it as an internal outreach tool for the program areas to educate them on the new MBE program, how their involvement and engagement in the program will help make the program successful. We're still partnering with DDOT, District of Columbia Unified Certification Program. Any assistance and processes there for our certification program. We'll be using them as our tools for the MBE program, but also looking to this entity to help grow the database that's needed for us to implement the MBE program. And again, the social outreach, socioeconomic outreach programs that we're doing. And last year, we had 2 large virtual events that we did. One was in September and one was in November. We had about 400 firms that attended both events. And at those programs, we certainly was talking about the new MBE program and how firms can get involved. We're also doing smaller micro outreach events too. We have a calendar of about 4 that's scheduled for this year already. More of teaching sessions, trying to get on the level of any impact that we're having in the community. Are there problems? Are they understanding the program? Are they able to assess our tools? Any technology issues that are going on? We're looking to make sure that we're engaged with the community to understand if there's issues with our programs. DBE, switching to DBE goal attainment, looking back over the last few years, as you recall, we had a 22% goal in FY federal fiscal years 18. We attained 21.4%, and 19, 25.8%. At that time, we reassessed the goal, and we our triennial goal now is 25%. Unfortunately, in FY 20, we did not meet the goal. We were shy about 4% of meeting the goal for that fiscal year. But currently, FY 21, we are at 24.9%. So we're on track for this fiscal year to meet the goal. But just want to talk a little bit about not being able to attain the goal during the pandemic. COVID-related procurements that we had to really focus on really became the priority, and other contracts that were already in the pipeline to be awarded or that had been assessed in our plan of contracts for that goal were slowed down. They wasn't put on hold, but they were slowed down because some of the other COVID-related items took precedence. So just a list here of things that we focused on during the pandemic to make sure that we could meet the needs of our, and the safety needs of our employees. So there was 12 to 15 additional formal, this is 90 to 120-day procurements that we had to do, large procurements, 283 purchase orders that were awarded for PPE and disinfectant supplies. And also, as we transitioned to a telework environment, we were supporting all the IT equipment and services that was needed to support our teleworking workforce. So, but what we found out was during those solicitations, especially for the simplified, we were reaching out to small businesses to get their quotes also. We found out that some of them locally, at least 5, were able to supply some of the PPE that we needed. And of those 5, 2 of them were actually certified as DBEs. So it's a total of $3.6 million that we were able to award to small businesses for some of that unanticipated COVID-related procurements. So, and from that, we've developed some strong relationships, starting to bring them into conversations about how we do business for some of the larger opportunities that may come along or come in the pipeline. The question came up about how we're able to recover and back on track to meeting our goal. And I think the answer is just that it was the timing, because we did slow down some of the projects that were in our plan, but we were able to go ahead and award them And that is what's reflected here as far as our goal. And I actually checked our goal attainment this morning, and it's since I did this slide, it's at 25.3. So we are definitely on track to meet our goal. We'll be reporting this out by the end of March to FTA. These are some of the representative projects that was awarded between October and January towards meeting this goal. Ongoing initiatives that we are currently involved in, again, just trying to make sure that we're marketing properly the new program as well as our DBE program, that we are trying to grow our database of small and minority businesses. We're in partnership with the DC Mayor's Office and also Compto to try to do that. We have a small business program office newsletter that we use to talk about anything that's going on, training sessions. We're also using external surveys for every event that we do. We want to get feedback or just be on a constant conversation with the small and minority businesses. We want to make sure that they know that the Small Business Office is the advocate for the program and for the small businesses, that they have rights, and do you know what those rights are? That you understand prompt payment clauses and things that could be in their contract or should not be in their contract. So we're in a training mode always with the small businesses. Again, talking about one of the events that's coming up on March the 11th is Meet the Primes. We're using it as a advertisement for some of our large projects that are coming on board that we're about to advertise. We have some potential prime contractors that may be interested in bidding on that. So we're bringing in the small and minority business community to meet with them and talk about the projects that we are actually getting ready to advertise. So it's actual real work. So we also want to learn about small businesses and what they're doing. So give them an opportunity to tell us about their project, their product or service. Another series. So we have a series of events that we're going to be doing this year just to engage the small and minority businesses. And then, of course, we're in the middle of our disparity study that we kicked off January last month. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Really appreciate your work on this. I think when we first talked about this, now it's been about 2.5 years, and your leadership in getting us to this point is very much appreciated. The program has come a very long way. Before we open it up to questions and comments, I'd like to get a motion on the table from a committee member to approve the item.
So moved.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Motion by Mr. Goldman. Is there a second?
Second,
Mr. McMillan. Okay, let's go around the table, so to speak. Ms. Gideby Jenkins, any questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on. Mr. Goldman.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Ms. Moore, for your report. I just tried to ask a little more clarity on how you develop this 25% goal and how it's computed. Is the denominator to get to that 25% the total spent by WMATA on contracts by outside contractors in a given year?
Yeah, just a little clarity. We're talking about the DBE goal, the 25% DBE goal?
Yes.
Okay, yes, there's a goal methodology that is approved by FTA. And yes, it's based on contracts awarded during that fiscal, well, actually it's a semi-year goal and then the entire fiscal year. But yes, based on contracts, total contracts awarded that have federal funds in them.
That have federal funds. All right.
Yes.
And then what is the numerator? Is the numerator the number of those contracts awarded to minority and female businesses?
Yeah, the DBE, those defined as DBE, disadvantaged businesses. Yeah.
All right, so how does that definition of disadvantaged businesses vary from the definition of women and minority business enterprises in the new program?
We're closely aligned with the same definition. We're talking about different pots of money, basically. Closely aligned with the definition and the thresholds for the growth. The gross receipts of the firms. We didn't deviate at all from that. We wanted to follow standards that are already out there. So our program really doesn't differentiate from that standpoint. It's basically those. Now we're looking at projects that do not have federal funds in it that will be in our program to be assessed goals on it. That's the difference in our two programs.
All right, and do you have a number available of what's the volume of contracts in the federal pot, and then what's the volume of contracts in the non-federal pot that the 25% will relate to?
I do not have that information today, but I can certainly get that information for sure.
Thank you. That would be appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. McMillan?
No questions. Thank you for the update on progress to date.
Thank you. Mr. Bolger?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Gideby Jenkins, are you? Yes, there you are, Stephanie. Yep.
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties.
No worries. No worries.
Ms. Suzette, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this. I think when you think about how we are able to do outreach and really ensure that there is greater engagement, it is really through the education and outreach, and to see the ways in which you all are trying to continue to do that work, especially during COVID, finding new ways to host the virtual sessions, getting the large amount of participation up to 400 folks through a pandemic, I think speaks to a very intentional effort. I want to go to slide 5 in terms of the DC Unified Certification Program. And can you explain why that is important? Is it more so that if you are a business registered in DC, you also now have this, you don't have to go through the same certification process to engage with WMATA?
That is definitely part of it. And I think this has been a long-standing relationship that we are building. And by using some of the resources that are already there, we're not reinventing the wheel. They have different ways of reaching out. They have entities that they're already engaged in. We want to use some of those pipelines to get to as many firms as we can and as quickly as we can.
And is the thought process that we would be trying to get that unified certification for the other jurisdictions, Maryland and Virginia as well, so that regardless of whether you're certified in Virginia or Maryland, that you can still engage with Metro?
Absolutely, definitely.
Okay. And then the Procurement Review Committee that you talked about, can you explain a little bit more? Usually, I think when a project is being built out, especially as it relates to capital projects, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that later on, the challenge is that the certification and ensuring that you have good DBEs on the federal side, but also women and minority-owned businesses on the smaller side, non-federal dollars, accounting for those things ahead in the project life cycle is often not considered. And so can you talk a little bit about the Procurement Review Committee and what sides of the businesses are involved as part of it to ensure that whether we're talking about the actual project development, a plan, being able to actually maintain the project, how you all are thinking about that full life cycle of a project and being able to engage businesses?
Yes. Trying to think where I'm going to start with that one. It's about first of all, it's about the engagement and the relationships, and we have great ones within the authority. So what we are doing is some of the programs capital program, CAPD, they actually have their own outreach program going on. So they are fully engaged and understand getting the word out, whatever their projects are. They could be working on a platform project, because there were several of those that we did. So they're already getting notices out or doing, they're doing outreach events to talk about their projects. What we're doing then is they have already identified, well, there are subcontractable opportunities here, 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 and here. So we know, they know that coming to when they get to our procurement review committee meeting. They have already identified what those areas are. They've already engaged our small business program office. They've already identified, well, here's a list of firms that are in the directory that do this work. So they're doing all of that pre-work by the time that they get to the review committee. And we are intentionally not allowing anything to hit the street until they've come through us. So that's where we started. And then everybody is definitely on board with that and they understand it. So what my team is doing is they're going visiting different program offices to make sure that they understand this is the process, this is what we need you to do to help make us successful, and so we can make you successful.
Thank you. And I think it speaks to a longer journey that Metro has been on. So with your leadership, we just thank you for all that you've done to date. My last comment will just be on the importance of reform. You said that the last time that these updates were made were in 2005. And I think oftentimes when we think about policy updates, we don't really consider the implications of that. Many policies reflect what is happening in that era of time. So the fact that it's been about 15 plus years since we've had a conversation on making sure that we update our standards, and that you all have really kind of thought about and been doing reviews for areas to improve the program so that it reflects where we are in this moment, just speaks to that level of continued leadership. So thank you for continuing to find ways to evolve. It's not just enough to have a policy, we need to continue to update our policies to reflect the era that we're in any given sector. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby Jenkins. Mr. Letourneau.
Nothing for me. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Bolger.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
Good morning. Good to see you, Ms. Moore.
Good morning.
Good morning. A couple of quick questions for you. I had a similar question about the procurement review committee. I think it functions very similar to the one that we use within MDOT and that procurement review group. And so I think that question got answered. One of the things I was thinking about is kind of the mentoring component. Can you talk a little bit about, sometimes these firms that are really trying to get started or trying to understand how to do business with us at times need a little bit of kind of mentoring and guidance. Would you talk a little bit about kind of some of the tools that we might have for them to kind of help them guide that, or maybe some ideas you might have to kind of maybe cultivate some new firms and expand that?
Yes, definitely thinking about that. We haven't actually put a formal mentor program in place yet, but some of the tools that we are using, first of all, is how we do business. We have these sessions with the small businesses. Some of the auditors have one-on-one sessions with the small businesses. They make appointments. They tell them about the forms, so you make sure you fill out the forms properly. They talk about the prompt payment tool that's automated right now so that they can get paid on time, which is very important. They also talk about bonding. We do have resources that we actually talk about bonding and how they can make sure that they are able to get the bonding and the different resources that are out there to help them with bonding. So we don't have a formalized program, but these are some of the practices that we're doing now on our way to formalizing a program, because we do believe that that's important. We do talk to them also about specifically about clauses in a subcontract that should not be there, that sometimes our prime contractors will put in there, and it's adverse to small and minority businesses. So for instance, if we have retainage clause in our contracts with the prime contractor. Well, theirs and their subcontract should not be larger than that. Those types of things a small business may not know, but we are equipped to have those kind of conversations with the small and minority businesses.
That's great. Thank you. At some point over the next couple of years, I'd love to see if we can set up some sort of an event for some of the small and minority businesses and the disadvantaged businesses that we have working on the purple line. As that project starts to close out, it might be good to kind of see if that pool could help in there. And then just one other simple question. You know, some of the goal issues we've seen across the country are related to the manufacturing delays that we're seeing on some of the products across the country or really across the globe. And that sometimes being tied to some of our goals within project efforts. Have we seen kind of manufacturing and product availability issues kind of hurting our percentages at times on our work?
I haven't really seen anything specific to
Okay.
that that has manifested itself. No, not in our contracts.
All right, good deal. Well, that's all I had, but thank you for your work.
I did want to mention, yes, you're absolutely right. The PRC was not an idea that we made up. We kind of borrowed from the state, as that was very familiar with that process when I was at the state of Maryland. So, and it works.
It does. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Slater. And Mr. Rouse.
Yes, good morning. Hopefully there's no lag here on my computer, but just thank you, Ms. Moore, but one quick question for you, and I think you touched on a little bit, but from the new program, out of your experience, what under the new program addresses some of the shortcomings of the previous program? Is it more the oversight tools that you had or were thinking of putting in place, or is it something more like what Secretary Slater was talking about, and that's trying to increase outreach or engagement with prime contractors and things of that nature?
It's definitely more of the outreach and growing our directory and our database of small and minority businesses. But the other part of it is having the ability to set aside projects for the small businesses. That to me is going to be an immediate impact on the small business community. So the other program that we want to sunset, it had a cap on it of $100,000. Well, we're not doing that in the new program. We're totally looking at the availability of firms to do the work and let that guide which projects we set aside for the small business community.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that last point is very important. So I think that clears up some of my questions there. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse. Again, Suzette, thank you for all your work on this. You know, we started this process, I guess, 2.5 years ago now when you took over, and it really has come a long, long way, and really appreciate all your efforts and the team's efforts, really. Can't do it alone, for sure. Okay, so we have a motion on the table by Mr. Goldman, seconded by Mr. McMillan. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Aye.
Mr. McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Welcome, everyone, and again, apologize for the interruption. We have been told we are good now. What we are going to do is, given we had the one information item on our executive committee meeting, we are going to move that item to another meeting in our meeting in a couple weeks. Chief Pavlik, and we'll look forward to hearing your report in 2 weeks. Next, we will move on to the Finance Committee because we do have an important action item there. I will say if we do have another interruption, we will end the committee meetings for the rest of the day, but we did want to proceed with the Finance Committee and Chair McMillan and his report and Mr. Webster. So we will now move to the Finance Committee. Director McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Smedberg. I'm Steve McMillan, Chairman of the Finance and Capital Committee. as we begin today's committee meeting, we'll start with the administrative business. First, approval of the agenda. If there's no objections to the agenda, we'll consider it approved as presented. I hear no objections. The agenda is approved. Next, we'll have the minutes from our previous meeting before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. So today we're focusing on Metro's capital budget, and the action item for today, staff will be asking for board approval to update the fiscal year 2021 capital budget to account for the previously announced acceleration of the platform improvement project, to reflect schedule changes for the Potomac Yard Station work, and to IT improvements for cybersecurity and remote work. Staff is also requesting board approval for authorization to negotiate or competitively sell bonds backed by dedicated funding. When we first approved the budget last year, it assumed that a portion of the capital program would be debt financed, and today we take the first formal step in that process. With that, as a reminder for presenters, please introduce yourself before you begin. Participants, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking to cut down on background noise. If we're able to continue beyond this action item, then we will talk about getting into the capital work session. But for the moment, we will focus on those on the fiscal 2021 item and the bonding item. So, Mr. Webster, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Could you just confirm you can hear me and see my screen?
I can hear you and see the screen.
Okay,
is this going out to the public?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Tom.
My name is Tom Webster. I'm Metro's Executive Vice President for Strategy, Planning, and Program Management. And this morning, staff will recommend committee approval of an amendment to this year's FY21 capital budget and request authorization for the sale of dedicated revenue bonds to support the capital program. And time permitting, we will discuss the strategy and highlights of next year's FY22 capital budget, the proposed 6-year CIP, and our 10-year outlook. And we will provide the committee with a brief update on the renewal of the capital funding agreement among Metro and our jurisdictional partners. So through the capital program, Metro is restoring and sustaining safety, reliability, and state of good repair. And we're modernizing the system for our customers, our employees, and to support the future of the region. Over the past 5 years and over the first half of the current fiscal year, FY21, Metro has made significant progress in program delivery, and these investments are showing results in terms of improved safety, service reliability, and performance. The platform program, through which we're replacing deteriorated platforms and returning them to a state of good repair, is now essentially at the halfway mark, with phases 1 and 2 in Virginia now complete. We've received all 748 of the 7,000 series rail cars, and we've removed the old and obsolete cars from service. And we've completed our underground station platform lighting improvement program. For bus and paratransit, we continue our successful life cycle bus vehicle replacement and rehabilitation programs, which help to support safe and reliable bus service. And we've started 2 projects to replace the obsolete Northern and Bladensburg bus garages with modern, cleaner facilities that will be designed to support a future zero-emission bus fleet. And this past September, we launched the mobile fare payment for customers with Apple devices. We recently completed the wireless infrastructure project, and wireless service is now available in underground system-wide. And the construction of our consolidated office buildings to replace the obsolete office facilities and leased space is underway. Last spring, as the extent of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Metro Rail and Metro Rail ridership became clearer, we recognized that there is an opportunity to further accelerate overdue capital projects during this time when most Metro Rail riders are not traveling. And last spring, we discussed those plans to accelerate state of good repair projects, and in particular, the platform program with the board and with our stakeholders, and we've advanced those plans. Our FY21 capital budget adopted by the board last spring currently totals $1.8 billion. And through the first half of the year, Metro invested just over $800 million. Again, evidence of our continued improvement in project delivery and investment, and we're on pace for another record year in terms of both work completed and dollars invested in the system. And with the acceleration of the platform work and a few other projects schedules changing, our current expenditure forecast for the range or for the year ranges from 1.9 to 2.1 billion. And as a reminder for the committee, the variability in the forecast and the reason for that forecast range is a function of the way Metro budgets in the capital program on an annual expenditure basis, which means that changes in project and program schedules, either accelerations of projects or delays in projects, they can have an impact on the budget for 1 year without actually a change in scope or any impact on the overall long-term capital program plan. More specifically on the platform program, Metro has now completed the first 2 phases of the program and is now moving to phase 3 and 4. Phase 3 of the program actually starts this weekend with work beginning at Arlington Cemetery and Addison Road. Phase 3 will continue this summer at Green Line stations in Maryland. And phase 4 of the program will be delivered in the summer of 2022 on the Orange Line in Maryland and DC east of Stadium Armory. We're beginning that preparation work now for phase 4 to ensure we're prepared to deliver these projects effectively. There's particularly some long lead items associated with the rehabilitation of the Chevrolet aerial structure, Chevrolet Bridge, so we want to get started now. We anticipate that these platform programs will be funded by a combination of federal PREA grants and the regional match to those grants, as well as dedicated funding and dedicated funding debt. The acceleration of this program overall requires an increase in the program budget of $205 million in FY21, with no increase in jurisdictional contributions to make that happen. 2 other projects that require some adjustment. First, with the construction of Potomac Yard Station, the new infill station, now underway, there's a need to update the expenditure schedule that was developed before construction began and before permits were issued. Update that to essentially align with the project schedule. There's no change or increase in the overall total project cost estimate. And the project, importantly, is sponsored and fully funded through an agreement with the City of Alexandria. And then finally, the 4th project program area in Metro's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're making a variety of information technology investments to support remote work for most of our administrative and office functions, and critically investments in cybersecurity, investments in our network, given the changed environment here. And so a budget amendment of about $11 million is necessary to support those capital efforts for information technology. So in summary, staff is recommending a $255 million capital budget amendment, $205 million for the acceleration of the platform program, $39 million for the Potomac Yard essentially schedule update, and $11 million for those IT investments and our pandemic response. Again, the amendment requires no increase in jurisdictional contributions, and the increment here will be funded by dedicated funding debt and reimbursable project funding. With this amendment, the FY21 capital budget will total just under 2.1 billion, and our updated anticipated funding sources for the year show an increase, as I just said, in jurisdictional reimbursable project funding, as well as an increase in dedicated funding debt, the use of dedicated funding debt to approximately 550 million, again, depending on project schedules in FY21. It also confirms no change, no increase in jurisdictional contributions in the 21 budget. And with that, I'd like to turn to my colleague Dennis Anasike for a discussion on the dedicated funding bonds. Dennis?
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. As part of the capital program, WMATA plans its second debt issuance using dedicated revenue credits to cover the accelerated cost that Tom just described. Today, as Chairman McMillan mentioned, begins that process with $360 million of additional debt to be issued for WMATA. This amount is sufficient to cover the immediate need and is consistent with WMATA's financing plan for capital projects. For the record, the proposed debt will also be consistent with WMATA's debt policy in terms of both duration and cost of issuance. Mr. Chairman, staff plans to come back to the board next month with additional details on the cost of issuance as well as the method of sale. And after that, seek authorization from the board to proceed with the transaction. Tom.
Excuse me, Tom, this is Chairman McMillan. At this point, I believe it'd be appropriate to jump to slide 27 so that we can complete the action item and then go back to the discussion of the FY22 program.
Of course.
Okay.
So I'll just wrap up with the staff recommendation for committee approval of the $255 million increase to the FY21 capital budget to support the platform program, Potomac Yard, and IT investments, and that we recommend approval to move forward with that dedicated funding debt issuance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. So before we begin, can I ask a motion and a second from committee members on the request?
I move the issue, Steve.
Thank you. And a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that, we will do a quick round of questions and comments. I will just reinforce something that Mr. Webster noted in his presentation, that the action we're taking today is much more of a technical and bookkeeping exercise rather than a policy exercise, because we budget on a cash basis and these are multi-year projects. We make an estimate of the cash flow at the beginning of the budget cycle, and it is not uncommon for the board to have to come back towards the end of the year if those expenditures are going forward. The items that are responsible that result from the need for this budget amendment are things that the board has been briefed on and been previously discussed in public. So that's all I have to say on this item. Next, Secretary Slater.
Thank you, Chairman McMillan. I don't have any questions on the the capital budget amendment, but I do, when between now and then when the new bond issuance comes back to the board for final approval, I would like to understand a little bit more of kind of how the driving of the capital program is in terms of kind of the financial planning and the debt service. I'm a little bit, we didn't really see some of the earlier slides, but some of the other earlier slides illustrated some of the debt service components. Then I just want to understand kind of the longer term plan to understand if 5-6 years from now, more of the budget is getting eaten up by debt service, that we're not creating a new kind of backlog on capital projects. Just, I'd like to understand a little bit more of the plan there.
Sorry, do we have a response from either Tom or Dennis, or?
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Board Member. We will provide additional details on both the debt capacity, in addition to what Tom already has in the budget. When we come to the board next month, our goal to speak specifically on the debt issuance, our goal is to provide additional details, which will also incorporate some of the data that you have on the capital need, the amounts of debt outstanding, and the plans for the next 6 years.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could add, as we go into the 22 work session portion of this, I will speak some to the multi-year outlook for the program, including the debt strategy.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, next, Chair Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to make a similar comment as Secretary Slater just did, and also Mr. Aniseki or Mr. Webster. Is there a time where we effectively are fully extended on debt? And if so, is what date is that, or what year is that? Is that part of an information item that we could get back or get an answer on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You may recall that at the last board meeting, you did request, as well as Mr. Latano, some sense of what WMATA's debt capacity is, and we provided some information to that effect. But specifically to your question, at this time, we're estimating 2027, 2028 as the time that that will be the dedicated revenue credit will be exhausted.
Okay. And does PREA have any impact on that, Dennis?
Yes, of course. I mean, without PREA, that timeline will be fast accelerated. So we are hoping that the presence of PREA will help extend that timeline.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Mr. Bolger.
I don't really have anything else to add, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Ross.
Was that me, Mr. Murillo? I couldn't hear you.
That's you, Devin.
Okay, thanks. I just had one quick question on the IT investments aspect. Cybersecurity, I don't really want to talk about in public forum, but the other investments, could you give us a sense of what that actually is and how we're getting up to 11 million in that area?
Yeah, certainly, and appreciate the question. So there's a couple of components, and so at a high level, there's investment in devices to support remote work. Many office workers had desktops, and to be able to support their working from home or from remote locations, we had have investment in devices for employees. And then, of course, significant investment in our VPN and related network capacity, and that was a big is a big driver of that cost.
Okay, and do we think we've hit all those costs already? or there's still investment needed in that area?
There's some ongoing investment that's needed, of course, to sustain, but we've made the upgrades required to support this level of working remotely, working differently.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Next, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you. To be very honest, I have some concerns on a policy level of proceeding with this acceleration of the platform work at this time, while we still have a FY22 operating budget that has a need for 171.4 million, so that we can provide our riders in the first 6 months of 2022 with a pattern of service that avoids 30-minute headways and closing 30 stations. Now, while we're all have a sense of euphoria and expectation and hope that Congress is going to enact this 30 billion in COVID-related relief funding for transit, and that would certainly allow us to use those federal funds to close that $171.4 million operating budget gap. Until that actually happens, I think we're running some risk here, and we all know from present timeline that should happen certainly by the middle of next month. And so I'm somewhat reluctant to move forward on this acceleration right now, because this acceleration of 210 or 200, a little more than that, which will be funded by debt, is fairly frightening when you look at. I mean, the total debt right now would be over $500 million in this fiscal year. So to the extent that we could avoid taking on that additional debt right now, I think that should be our goal. And if we're successful and the federal government comes through and solves our problems on the operating budget side, then we would have the opportunity to look at some other mechanisms for letting this project go forward, the platform acceleration project go forward, because it does provide some real benefits, especially for a number of stations in Maryland and especially in Prince George's County. And one of the ways that we could do that, which I had mentioned last month in terms of filling the hole in the operating budget, is essentially to put off the purchase of buses next year, which might save $200 to $250 million, because we're currently only operating bus at about 65 to 70% of pre-COVID levels. So the 100 buses that would be purchased annually, roughly about 10%, is something that we could put off and do without, and that could create an opportunity just within the capital budget to rearrange our priorities, rearrange our projects, and move ahead with this platform construction work and acceleration of that project without the need to go to the bond market for another as much as 360 million at this time. So I would urge my colleagues on the committee to defer action on this item for another month, or if you decide to go forward with it, that we decide not to bring it to the board this month, but to put it off for review by the full board until sometime in the March board meeting, after we know whether Congress has passed the COVID relief that would provide 30 billion nationally for transit and will probably allow us to solve our operating budget deficit for the upcoming fiscal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. In response to that, I want to ask staff two brief questions, and if you have some reaction to that, I'll recognize you again. Mr. Anasike, are we allowed under the dedicated funding laws of the jurisdictions or under the bond covenants to use those bond proceeds to cover operating deficits?
No.
Okay. And Mr. Webster, my understanding is the board was briefed on these on the acceleration of the platform project, the change in schedule. I believe it was July and October of last year. Is that roughly correct?
Yes, roughly. I think it was June or July of last year, and in October.
Okay, and isn't some portion of that acceleration already happening, either on the ground or in terms of our agreements with contractors?
Yes, just as a practical matter here, the contract for Platform Phase 3 has been awarded, and as I mentioned earlier, the work starts on Saturday.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, if I could.
Are you recognizing me again for a response?
If you have one, yes, Mr. Goldman.
Certainly. Well, if on the ground the thing is moving forward, then it wouldn't hurt whether we put this off for a month to formalize our official approval at board level. Second of all, I'm not proposing at all that we use money raised through the dedicated funding provided by the jurisdictions for operating expenses at all. What I'm proposing is that we reduce the amount of money that we're seeking to raise using dedicated funds from the 360 million to something much lower than that, and essentially fund the 200 or 250 million needed for the platform acceleration work through other amendments to the capital budget by putting off the purchase of buses this year, which we probably, in my opinion, don't need. And that could enable us to reprogram maybe 250 million of the budget into use for the platform reconstruction acceleration effort. Thanks.
I appreciate the clarification.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Smedberg, were you needing to?
Well, I just wanted to say, Mr. Chair, and appreciate Mr. Goldman's comments. But Mr. Webster, aren't some of the projects that we're talking about here, aren't they, fairly, urgent in nature and in many cases really are safety issues? Don't we have, platforms that are quite literally and figuratively crumbling? That there are some efficiencies here to be gained, financially and otherwise, moving ahead with something like this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. These are platforms that are in significantly deteriorated condition. They are safe today, but they are not in a state of good repair. And the longer that continues, the higher there is a potential for future safety issues. And certainly, the earlier we do this, the lower our risk, and the sooner we're addressing, again, what is essentially overdue infrastructure work that should have already been accomplished.
And are there efficiencies in doing some of this work while ridership is low, and getting sort of ahead of this, so we are ready when people do come back?
Certainly, there are tremendous advantages to doing this while ridership is very low, and not waiting until such a time as riders may be returning to the system and then closing a significant number of stations. Now, this will have impacts on ridership, and
well,
of course, but again, the earlier we do it, the better off we are.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, Mr. Letourneau.
All right, so it's a little difficult to kind of unpack sort of Michael's kind of proposal and/or this without having the whole picture. And I know that we received the proposed FY22 capital budget last night. I have not looked at it yet, but I think that would probably help try to make sense of whether there's some other way to do this. In general, I think we're talking about, in terms of platform upgrades, a necessary project. I mean, this is part of state of good repair. This is not optional work. the platforms are deteriorating. We've all kind of established that. In some cases, I think we've expended money, so we're going to have to pay for it. But I don't know, looking forward, whether it would make sense to do some things differently with the capital program without having looked at that. I share the question that Secretary Slater and Chair Smedberg had about overall debt issuance. Hopefully some of that is in the budget. I'm concerned about the period from FY28 to like 31, where apparently we will have expended all of our dedicated funds, and then, you know, how do we fund a capital program? So we need to start thinking about that. But, you know, given the timeline here, you won't be actually issuing bonds, you know, until a couple months from now, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so I think even if we move this forward today, there is time to look at it. I think, I don't want to speak for it. I think Mr. Goldman was raising two issues that I'm not sure if he was saying we should not fund something else in the budget this year and do this instead, like buses. But he also brought up federal legislation, and I think it's fair to ask is, you know, could we receive cash from the feds dedicated for infrastructure, you know, that flows to WMATA that we use for a particular purpose that fits in the CIP. I just don't think we're going to know that for quite some time. Is that something the staff is kind of tracking though?
Yes, and you know, we're of course optimistic about that, but I agree it'll be some time before we know.
Okay, so I think in this case for the platform we've got to move forward, and staff is not recommending that we defer any other items in the 21 CIP or capital budget in order to do this instead of issuing debt, right?
No, we're not recommending that, no.
Okay. And, you know, given where we are, you know, we're in the 21 fiscal year, we're already, you know, a good ways through it. I'm not sure if we would be able to do that anyway. I think, you know, obviously we'll have to look at it for FY22 and beyond as part of that process. But I think I'm comfortable with this.
All right. Thanks to Mr. Letourneau. Ms. Gideby Jenkins.
Can we go to, thank you. Can we go to slide 5 for my questions? Or actually, let's start with 4. So where are we in terms of the bus, new replacement buses? Are those already completed since they're listed as progress and achievements? And can you give me the percentage of how many, if any, are zero emissions or electric?
So this represents our active replacement bus program. You may recall our bus manufacturer did have some interruptions in manufacturing due to COVID. We've received some of the buses that were due in the prior fiscal year, FY20 and FY21, the current year, and we have begun taking delivery of the buses ordered for FY21. These are obviously new buses, some diesel, some CNG, that are replacing buses that are 15 years old and of course built at a time when emission standards were not what they are today. The zero emission bus program we have launched. We have not yet acquired new electric buses as part of that test and evaluation process, but that is underway and will be happening over the course of the next 18 to 24 months.
Okay, thank you. Can you go to slide 5? Okay, so just looking at the FY forecast in terms of how much we're allocating to support the rail system comparatively to the bus facilities, paratransit overall, it looks like it's about 12% of the overall forecasted budget that we're allocating for bus facilities, bus upgrades as part of those pieces. Is that a correct understanding of overall how much we're spending in terms of capital investments?
In the current fiscal year, I think that is about correct, yes.
Okay, can we go to slide 13? Actually, I think it is.
So Ms. Kitty Jenkins, I've not presented these yet, but I can go where you're trying to go.
No problem.
Is
To
it-
the area that we have under FY22, only because this is our only budget session until we kind of come back in 2 weeks. I just want to make sure that I'm raising the questions.
Sure.
For the vehicle 25% that we have for state of good repair, can you just deconstruct that a little bit? How much of that is rail comparatively to just bus when we're talking about the vehicle percentage?
I apologize. Where are you?
Capital needs forecast, it would be slide 13.
You were there. Yeah, there you go. On the right side, vehicles.
I will need to follow up with a specific percentage there. What's included in those capital needs, of course, are our annual bus acquisition program, so about 100 buses a year, our replacement, the 2 and 3000 series rail cars, as well as bus rehabilitation and bus and rail car rehabilitation. But I can get you a more detailed breakdown after the meeting.
That works, no problem. Thank you. And then just going to, and I'll quickly run through this, just going to slide 20 in terms of our outlook overall through 2021. When we talk about the major capital investments that we're talking about, particularly as it relates to Metro Bus and bus facilities, paratransit overall, what we know now is that the majority of those who are most reliant on Metro is our bus riders as part of this discussion. And so the outlook includes updates to Metro bus shelters overall in terms of the replacements, and also making sure that we're addressing the bus rehab and Metro access fleet, which I think we often get concerns about. So just wanting to confirm that for folks from a public education standpoint.
Yes. Restoration of bus shelters, particularly at our transit centers at Metro Rail stations, improvements in bus customer information, and yes, continuing our life cycle replacement and rehabilitation of bus vehicles as well as access vans. Yes.
Okay, great. And we can maybe land on slide 22, and I'll respond maybe something that Michael raised. I just want to make sure that during this time, we're not negotiating against ourselves unnecessarily. I think knowing that Metro Bus is a critical aspect for essential workers to be able to get to where they need to go to, just as much as we're raising the notion of state of good repair as it relates to Metro Rail. I hope that we will hold that same consideration as we talk about Metro Bus and what riders who are most dependent on the system and using the system right now, that we're also making those same commitments as part of it. Overall, and looking at both the FY22 budget and also the 6-year outlook, it looks like at best we're spending about 11 to 15% on Metro Bus facilities, paratransit overall, which I believe is significantly smaller than anything else that we are spending our money on overall as it relates to our system, and making sure that we have a good, proper state of good repair. So I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost as we are having conversations about budget implications. One of the things that I would like to see in future presentations as just an informational space, not necessarily for the budget process, is the percentage of maybe an overall, especially after we've had Suzette's presentation on both minority, or the DBE program and our small women program as well. What is the percentage of what that looks like as it relates to how much we spend and how much is allocated for the rail overall, the system, Metro Rail and then Metro Bus separately, and then how much of that breakdown is on the business and operations support. I do want to make sure that, it's interesting when we start to talk about where we're spending our money and how we're spending our money, who is benefiting, especially given how much Metro spends for the region. And so to the extent that we're also fully showing the allocation of the businesses that are supported by or are supporting Metro as part of the conversation, I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick comment. I'm not sure if it was clear. We will move on to Tom's presentation on the 6-year CIP here once we've completed the FY21 item. So you've previewed a little bit of that for us, and I thank you. Just one quick comment. I think the point you're making there on relative expenditures is valid, but Mr. Webster, if you could just confirm my understanding. One thing that makes that comparison not exactly precise is that for rail, we are funding the guideway, we are funding the stations. In bus, that responsibility is retained by our local jurisdictions. So again, I don't think that refutes your point so much as puts a little more clarity and nuance to it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I think that the important thing to note here is that bus transformation and improving bus service is a regional investment in both Metro's assets and facilities, buses, and the maintenance and facilities that support them. But then, substantial regional investment in the roadway and the traffic signals. And that investment would occur outside of Metro's capital program, although it's equally important to supporting our transit system.
And just for clarity, Mr. Chair, I fully understand that we control everything underground, and that's within our purview of what we own as land. I think what I'm trying to emphasize is the experience for those who are relying on Metro Bus is affected by the shelters, the buses actually running, and so just making sure that we are really kind of considering where we're spending our money, the amount of investment that we're spending, especially as we realize who's most dependent on Metro during this time.
For me, at least, that point came through loud and clear, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we will close discussion of this item, and I'll ask the Board Corporate Secretary to administer a roll call vote.
Thank you. Chair McMillan?
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater?
Aye.
Director Smedberg?
Aye.
Alternate Director Bulger?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. And so now we will move on to the work session on the fiscal year 22 capital budget. So back to you, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, through the capital program, we are advancing our capital investment strategy and our priorities, safety, reliability, state of good repair. We're continuing the replacement and rehabilitation projects and programs, accelerating projects to address our overdue infrastructure and systems needs. We're working to integrate resiliency and sustainability both as priorities and also as elements of projects as they're advanced. And on the financial side, from a financial perspective, the proposed program, 6-year program, is consistent with the commitment to cap jurisdictional allocated capital contributions at an annual 3% increase. And as we've discussed, the proposed program is funded in large part by both dedicated funding and dedicated funding supported bonds. In 2019, Metro, we completed an assessment and developed an updated 10-year capital needs forecast. The assessment found that Metro's capital investments over the past few years have had a significant impact on the backlog of overdue state of good repair needs. So an assessment in 2016 found about $7 billion in overdue backlog, and our assessment as of the end of 2018 found an estimated backlog of about $5 billion. Forecast also shows a need for approximately $22.5 billion of investment over the next 10 years. $5 billion to address those estimated overdue needs, and $11 billion to sustain safety and state of good repair programs, and then also importantly, about $7 billion in modernization updates for customers and employees, and to support the future of the Metro system. So importantly here, capital investment in the system from the federal government through FRIA and formula grant programs and other grant programs And from the region, with dedicated funding and state and local contributions, they're what's driving these significant improvements in our system. We've made significant progress in addressing our overdue needs, including the replacement of rail cars and restoring our track. And now we're halfway through this platform program. But very, very important for the board and for the region to know we've got much more work to do to address those overdue needs, including in key priority areas, completing the platform rehabilitation program, addressing deficient and deteriorating bridges and other structures, including tunnels, our systems that support both rail and bus, and our support facilities, bus divisions, rail maintenance facilities, and office facilities. The federal and regional investment has also supported the continuation and the establishment of new, essentially recurring, ongoing, cyclical maintenance, rehabilitation, and replacement programs. These are really critical to sustaining safety and state of good repair, and helping prevent new backlogs from emerging. So this is how we stay in front of assets deteriorating and past their useful life and potentially in unsafe conditions. Metro's proposed 6-year capital program totals $12.3 billion, and the proposed 22 capital budget totals $2.6 billion. You'll note the 6-year variation in annual investment, and it reflects really two primary factors. First, again, our efforts to catch up on overdue state of good repair work as quickly and efficiently as we can. And second, financial capacity constraints over the longer term. And I'll address that issue again in a couple of minutes. Last year, Metro also, we began developing a 10-year outlook for capital investments. So using the capital needs forecast and looking out over a longer period of time at needs. 10-year plan essentially incorporates the 6-year CIP and the annual budget, and then provides an outlook for the years beyond that. For ongoing projects and programs, things we're doing today that are going to continue either indefinitely because they're recurring, or a project that spans the 6-year period. And it also provides an outlook for projects that we expect will start beyond the 6-year period, as well as potential future investments to modernize the system as we move forward and prepare for the future. The 10-year components of this of the 10-year plan, the out-year components of the 10-year plan are not financially constrained. So Metro advances capital projects and programs through 6 investment categories, including railcar, rail systems, track and structure rehabilitation, stations and passenger facilities, bus facilities and paratransit, and then business and operations support. Just briefly touch on some highlights here in each category. So through the railcar investment category, we will be acquiring new 8,000 series rail cars to replace the 2,000 and 3,000 series cars that will be at end of life in the middle of the current decade. We're going to continue rehabilitating and maintaining our existing rail car fleet, as well as our rail car maintenance facilities, rail yards, and rail car maintenance equipment. And we're constructing the new heavy maintenance and overhaul facility, again, to modernize our railcar rehabilitation program, and importantly, to optimize space usage in our other yards and facilities. In rail systems, we're going to continue our state of good repair programs for automatic train control systems and infrastructure, continue planning and development of the modernization of that signal system, and that's a long-term, high cost, high impact project. And we will continue to advance both rail power systems, state of good repair, and upgrades of those power systems to support railcar operations. And I mentioned earlier, we've completed the wireless component of the radio infrastructure project, we're continuing to upgrade Metro's communication systems and radio infrastructure across the system. In track and structures, again, we're going to be continuing those safety and state of good repair ongoing programs. But importantly here, we are beginning to tackle some of our deficient bridges, aerial structures, the Rockville canopy, and have started to move forward with addressing some of those long-standing overdue needs. In stations and passenger facilities, again, the focus of this program in the near term is the platform rehabilitation project, but we have many other things happening at rail stations and at passenger facilities across the system, including our cyclical replacement of elevators and escalators and rehabilitation of those. This is where the new Potomac Yard station, the category that's found in, as well as a whole bunch of improvements sort of behind the scenes at stations in cooling systems, drainage pumping stations, and an infrastructure that supports those facilities. In bus and bus facilities, I mentioned earlier, this is vehicles, rehabilitation and replacement of vehicles. And importantly, in the 6-year period, the replacement of Northern and Bladensburg garages, and beginning preparations for potential replacement of Western Bus Garage as well. And in business and operations support, advancing our office consolidation effort, and you see the photos. Many of these buildings are now under construction and progressing. And this is also where a lot of our support from an IT perspective for operations and for the financial and business side of Metro are made. And then critically, we have infrastructure that goes across the system and supports bus, rail, paratransit, and business operations. And we're advancing those critical state of good repair needs as well, roofs and other facility needs. So in summary, we are advancing investment across those 6 categories in FY22 and through the 6-year period. 2.6 billion is our forecast for FY22, with significant investment in stations and passenger facilities, in large part for the platform program. In track and structures, we're beginning that significant bridge rehabilitation work in the near term, and in business and operations support as we advance the office consolidation program to completion. In the out years of the CIP, you begin to see a ramp up in bus facilities in that category as the construction of the replacement bus divisions at Northern and Bladensburg progress. And this table also includes our preliminary estimates of the revenue loss expected from capital projects like the platform program. And then importantly, the estimated debt service costs for the 6-year period. So as we discussed a little bit earlier, excuse me, as Metro issues bonds to support safety and state of good repair projects, the amount of debt service will grow and become an increasing share of the 500 million of dedicated funding over time and over the 6-year period. This next slide displays the FY22 anticipated funding sources as well as the outlook for the next 6-year period. And federal PREA funding is shown here as in the bottom of the part of the columns as not yet authorized beyond Metro's FY22 budget. Though, as discussed, we're very encouraged and thankful for the support and the progress being made by our congressional delegation to advance PREA funding into the future. The chart also here confirms no change to our prior forecast for jurisdictional contributions. The 3% annual growth cap is built in. And importantly, in the light blue and green sections of the columns, it shows that debt service will steadily become an increasing share of dedicated funding. And as you know, this of course is by design and consistent with the intent of dedicated funding, to use dedicated funding to leverage the market and advance projects to address our critical needs faster. But importantly, it does mean that Metro will have reduced funding capacity for future capital needs, and certainly highlights the need to focus our investments on priority safety and state of good repair needs over the 6-year period. And it also highlights that need for new infrastructure funding or other capital funding sources to support state of good repair going forward and the future of the system and the modernization of the system. Sorry. For FY22, Metro has updated the preliminary allocation of jurisdictional contributions. No change in the total. It remains at 3% more than the estimate from the fall, and or at the same level as the estimate from the fall, 3% more than FY20. But the allocations among the jurisdictions changed slightly from the version from the fall as a result of changes in the operating subsidy allocation for FY22. And then briefly, I want to provide the committee with an update on the capital funding agreement among Metro and the jurisdictions. The existing capital funding agreement expires at the end of this fiscal year. It was originally adopted back in about 2010 for a 6-year period, and we've been doing 1-year extensions with the jurisdictions since 2016. The jurisdictions and Metro have been working towards a new consensus 6-year agreement. Those discussions are nearly complete. Just for the committee's background here, the CFA governs allocated contributions from the jurisdictions, those funds that match FTA formula and competitive grants, as well as system performance funds from the jurisdictions. It does not include or govern PREA or dedicated funding contributions. It confirms this expenditure-based management of the capital program that was discussed a little bit earlier during the amendment. It establishes the schedule for our budget and capital program process, reporting requirements, reconciliation, and audit requirements. And the new agreement that's under discussion now will confirm that 3% annual contribution growth cap for the next 6 years. The group, Metro and the jurisdictions, intend to complete the discussion in time for the committee and the board to adopt the current agreement, or adopt a new agreement concurrent with the adoption of the CIP and the budget in